Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, the weather forecast says that we're supposed to get a bunch of snow in the next 2 days at extremely inconvenient times that are going to make it almost impossible for kids to get to school safely on school buses and stuff. So I may have more children than normal running around in my house this week. So I'm great. How are you, buddy? You doing good?
Well, I wonder about that, if it's better to, because as we were talking about during the show or before the show, the snow is supposed to come at some point overnight. Will there be enough snow to cancel school, or will there be enough snow at like noon to get like the early dismissal to even interrupt the day even more? And then you're sending everybody out into this kind of weather rather than just keeping them home. And, or are the weather people going to be completely wrong like they were a couple days ago when we weren't supposed to get like 6 inches of snow? And then turns out we did. And I think it's probably just because it was a degree cold enough to go from rain to snow. And then I don't know where my ice scraper snow brush is. I don't know what happened to it. So, but fortunately, I did have the shovel, and I could just scrape the shovel across the windshield and, get all of that snow off. I've moved up in the world from the days where I had to shovel out the driveway with an old garbage can. So look at me.
You're basically suburban MacGyver. It's incredible. I'm so blessed to work with you and have access to your ingenuity every day.
Did I ever tell you about the time I had to scrape my ice with the old license plate that I wasn't using?
I bet that was off of a car windshield. I bet that did great things for the glass.
It was fine. Totally fine. Yeah, but you got to use what you can, and we can't all be expected to have ice scrapers around.
This is not the kind of stuff they just sell in stores. You have to make it. So then that's not everyone has the craftsmanship skills to make an ice scraper. You can't just go down to the store and buy one. Where do you think we live? America? Come on, please.
That's why you're exactly right, Tom. That's why yesterday I went to the store to buy the spray that you spray on your windshield before they freeze over. That way you don't have to scrape them. So that's what I did. And maybe I'll do that again tonight, but I don't know how effective it is against 8 inches of snow. Probably not.
Well, we'll all find out together. I can't wait for the ongoing. Just go out like every hour and take pictures of your windshield, and we'll do it as a real scientific experiment. It'll be great.
No, I'm not big into science, Tom. We don't need to go off into this tangent, but one time in science for the science fair, I grew plants sideways to see whether gravity would be more powerful or the sun. And do you know what is more powerful?
Gravity.
That is correct.
How about that? And you know what? We're going to tie this all back into MacGyver. Don't thank me. Thank the moon's gravitational pull. I don't remember if that was a real MacGyver line or a spoof MacGyver line or a parody MacGyver line, but it's my favorite MacGyver line either way. So there you go. Hey, speaking of MacGyver, let's talk about Langdon Alger, who's also a person from TV. He had a question for our listener question show as I pull this show directly out of the ditch and back onto the road. Tony, Langdon Alger wants to know, how do you see the return of sixth-year seniors Xavier Johnson and Josh Proctor impacting the Buckeyes next year? And since Langdon Alger is secretly you, I guess I'll go first. It feels like both of those guys, these are two positions where Ohio State has, this is not like positions of desperate need. This is not the offensive line. If they were getting a sixth-year player back on the offensive line, when they got Matt Jones back, that was a huge deal because that was a position of desperate need. Neither of those guys are positions of desperate need, but they're both guys who feel like they should at least at the bare minimum contribute in as role players, and potentially more than that, because we've seen they don't really need Xavier Johnson. They have enough other talented running backs and wide receivers, but there's very clearly a role for Xavier Johnson, and you saw that against Georgia, where he's just kind of a matchup problem, even for good teams. And Josh Proctor gives him another veteran player back in that safety, back in that safety room where they can potentially, you can if you want to shuffle Lathan Ransom from the adjuster position to the bandit position or vice versa, you can do that because you have another veteran guy back there, because then you're not solely relying on, we did the depth chart projection, and you talked about, Sonny Styles and Malik Hartford potentially being the top two at one of those spots. And that's great. And I think Sonny Styles is going to be a wonderful player, but Sonny Styles should technically still be going into his true freshman year. So that's a pretty young player as well to be having at one of those, a position of that importance. So having Josh Proctor back there, even if it's just as insurance, that feels like that's a pretty big deal.
Well, and Josh Proctor has been a starting safety, opening day starting safety in 2021 and 2022 for the Buckeyes. Obviously, he broke his leg in 2021 in the second game of the season, so he was out for that year. And then this past year, plays, was it 2 snaps, 1 snap, 2 snaps against Notre Dame, gives up the play and then gets benched. But he still started, I think, 4 of the first 5 games for the Buckeyes, and then eventually gave way to Lathan Ransom. And I don't know, was this a matter of Josh Proctor playing himself out of the lineup, or Lathan Ransom playing himself into the lineup? I think maybe the latter, but then Josh Proctor never, Lathan Ransom, when he had some struggles, never played himself out of the lineup again. Josh Proctor, when he came in, it would be against the running teams so that he can be more of a linebacker than a safety. But I would expect him to be the number one strong safety, the bandit, going into the spring with Lathan Ransom moving to adjuster. Although, do they want to try Josh Proctor at the adjuster at the free safety? We know he's got the range, but does he have the discipline? I think they've found in the past, if you give him targeted things to do, he's better than options. And still, when they've given him these smaller tasks, he's not been able to hold on to the job. But now this is his second year in the defense. You would think he would be better. So I think it's certainly some insurance, because if Sonny Styles isn't ready, that Josh Proctor can play. So you have that. I kind of view these guys as, in terms of Xavier Johnson and Josh Proctor, having similar impacts on the guys around them, because I see there's some Swiss Army knife going on both sides. And for me, defensively, it's Sonny Styles. And Josh Proctor being on the field impacts that. Xavier Johnson is a Swiss Army knife in himself, but also so are Brandon Inniss and Caleb Brown, who he will be impacting the playing time of by his return. But when you look at Xavier Johnson coming back, averaged 11.6 yards a catch, 12.2 yards a rush, 22.4 yards a return, basically touched the ball 3 times a game, and would get you, kickoff returns being what they are. He ran or caught the ball 2 times a game and would pick up 12 yards for you. I think there is a role for him in this offense. But I think what you ask him to do, you can ask others to do as well. I think this just gives you an opportunity to do some niftier things. Like when they had Xavier Johnson at running back and they would pitch him the ball, and you can do some things there. And I think you can employ that kind of thought process with other players as well. It doesn't just have to be Xavier Johnson. So I think maybe they can learn from how they used him last year and use other guys that way as well this year. And then the Josh Proctor thing, I think there is a role for him and Sonny Styles at the same time in certain situations.
Yeah, it feels like that's. I think you're right on there. That these are guys who have some kind of role one way or the other. They're not necessarily going to be 60 snap a game guys. Proctor's more likely to be than Johnson, but yeah, it does. It feels like these are. I mean, at the very least, nice insurance options to have, and possibly more than that. Next one from Ben Ricker 72. How many receivers do you guys think hit the transfer portal after spring ball? I'm talking the guys that are in between Marv, Emeka, and this talented 2023 class. We, as a reminder, as an editorial position, we do not speculate on specific names, but I mean, it feels like there are probably. There are guys who are at the point of their careers where, with a spring where they figure out, hey, someone has to be like 9th on the depth chart there, 8th on the depth chart there. It feels like there's someone who's probably going to fall into that bucket, right?
Well, the thing is, you've got 12 scholarship receivers. You're not expecting any of the new four to go, the four freshmen. Are you expecting any of the four veterans, being Marvin, Emeka, Jaden Ballard, or Julian Fleming, to leave? So, like, we're talking about the 2022 class, basically, which is Kojo Antwi, Keon Grays, Caleb Burton, and Caleb Brown. I based on how much they played last year, and again, Caleb Brown had one catch, Keon Grays had one catch, Kojo Antwi I don't think had any catches, but saw some snaps. Caleb Burton didn't play at all. We see guys leave every year. Like, did we expect Mookie Cooper to transfer? I don't think so. Like, he transferred after 1 year. Is it going to shock anybody? I don't think so. We don't push anybody out, but I don't see a reason for two guys to leave unless, like, I think there's a way, because you're going to be losing Julian, Marvin Harrison, and likely Emeka Egbuka after this year. And so you're going to need to replace some guys, and there's going to be opportunities for the 2022 freshmen to play. And so this year, again, you're battling younger guys. So you should feel like, okay, I'm ahead of them right now. You should feel like you're ahead of the incoming freshmen because you're older. So they really shouldn't be too much in your thought process. You should be thinking about getting on the field. And right now there's only a handful of people ahead of you. And I didn't even have Xavier Johnson on this list. So there's 13 guys, but like, he's obviously going to be gone after this year. I think there's a path that nobody has to leave, but how often does nobody leave? And right now we're seeing it at running back, which is a surprise, which then I guess increases the odds that something happens at receiver, since, if we're parlaying these things, Tom, we know how that goes, and I know how it goes, and it doesn't go well. But, at some point, I don't think anybody's going to be shocked if somebody goes.
No, it would not be at all a surprise if one of the running backs transferred, or one of the wide receivers transferred, or one of both transferred. I mean, that wouldn't be a huge shock, just because of, like I said, I mean, this is purely a fact of life thing. Someone is going to be 8th or 9th on the depth chart, quite possibly someone who is coming back. So are you, that at that point, it's just a matter of, is that person comfortable with sort of playing the long game and continuing to work, or is it does that make it in your mind time to move on and go somewhere else? And very frequently you see guys, nationally look at depth charts and go, nope, peace, and hit the portal. So I would not be surprised with a running back, a wide receiver, or at least one of those happening after spring. But there are 15 practices of spring ball and a bunch of winter workouts between here and there, and so we'll see how all that goes. Next one from Williams McMillan: who will be attempting game-winning field goals next season? Tony, it feels like the answer is pretty clearly Parker Lewis, right? Jaden Fielding has been exclusively a kickoff guy so far. Jake Seibert seems like he's not. Maybe he's going to go back to kicking field goals now that the job is a little bit more open with Noah Ruggles out there. But doesn't it feel like Parker Lewis is the most likely answer there?
Yeah, and they also got a transfer from Casey Magyar out of Kent State, who was one of two on extra points in 2021, shows no stats in 2022. I guess he's technically another guy that could show up. But yeah, my first thought goes to Parker Lewis for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think if Jake Seibert is not back trying to win that job, then I think the ship has sailed there. Like, they don't feel that he can kick at Ohio State. And so, they're going to have to figure something out there. But yeah, I think it's Parker Lewis, and basically he technically redshirted this past year. So I believe he still has 2 years of eligibility if he needs it. So, that's where I would go. And he's got a decent history of kicking at USC, and he's obviously the most experienced and most productive. So, and does he, because there were thought that he was going to be the kickoff guy. So does he do that as well next year? Or is that, again, did Jaden Fielding do enough to earn that job? And do they even want the placement guy thinking about doing that at this point? Because that's kind of a luxury that places like Ohio State have, where, you know what, we've got two different kickers, and they've done that for better part of a decade at times, where they've had two different guys doing the job, and they could continue to do that if they want.
Yeah, and Fielding is, as of last time I heard, not on scholarship. They don't always announce whether guys are on scholarship, but I don't believe he's on scholarship right now, and I know they're technically a little over the 85 limit, which matters even less than it used to. So that, but I don't think they're necessarily in a spot where they're going to be handing him a scholarship immediately, or will have already handed him a scholarship immediately. So, if you've got that as a walk-on position, and you can, continue, I think he did a perfectly fine job at the kickoff position last year. So yeah, it would not surprise me if that was the lineup. Seibert, he's someone who, this is probably a very big spring for him, whether he's back at kicker, whether he is, he was kind of getting some run at corner last year, just sort of on the scout team. This is probably a big spring in terms of figuring out where does his future lie, because this is his third year at Ohio State, I think, now coming into his third year. So, this is kind of a moment where you've got to figure out what do you want to do with your life, young man? Do you want to be a kicker? Do you want to be a corner? What do you want to do? And so I guess we'll see where he is after this spring as well. Hard to know where to put him at the moment.
It's going to be his fourth year.
Fourth year. Okay. So yeah, the year even more so. All of the things I said, just with a little bit more emphasis in my voice. Go ahead and just, mentally amend my previous. Yes, there you go.
And then Parker Lewis, just to throw this in there. 2021, he was 17 of 22 on field goals, 23 of 24 on extra points. That was as a sophomore. As a freshman in 2020, and I can't remember if he was a redshirt freshman in 2020 or a true freshman. So obviously, if he's a true freshman, then he, that year doesn't count for him. But 9 of 13 on field goals and 23 of 23 on extra points. So expect him to have that job, assuming he still has the eligibility has still transferred over, because USC, who the heck knows?
Yeah, it would be interesting to know, if he had had like just a really clean, easy transfer, it would have been interesting to see if that kicking battle changed, if that changed anything in terms of the 2022 place kicker for Ohio State. Because, he came over, we saw him, he was visiting at the spring game last year, and we saw him then, and he transferred shortly after that. So, if that had been a clean, easy transfer with no NCAA hiccups, you wonder, is that an open kicking competition in fall camp, or was the plan all along to have him mostly sit last year and have Noah Ruggles be the kicker last year, and then have Parker Lewis take over in 2023? But, either way, you're not going to believe this, but the NCAA made something more complicated than it needed to be. And so there really was not, he did not get cleared to play, or, even be like dressed for games until like midway through the season. It might have been like October. It was really unnecessarily late, as per NCAA tradition.
And then one last thing on Jaden Fielding, because I was just looking at his roster bio. He was the number 7 rated kicker in the 2022 class. He was the kicker at IMG. He was perfect as a field goal kicker at IMG with a long of 50 yards, and 91% of his kickoffs went for touchbacks. I didn't realize he was, it sure seems like he could have gone somewhere on scholarship based on those numbers.
Yeah, so then that maybe makes it more likely that you do need to put him on scholarship if you want to keep him. And, maybe that's something that plays out. You see how the spring goes, and if he's still very clearly your best kickoff guy, or if he's potentially your best field goal guy, then you probably do need to put him on scholarship if you want to keep him. And with the churn that you're seeing in the portal, it feels like teams are probably going to be a little under the 85 more often than not, and have those that extra spot or two available to put a guy on scholarship after the spring transfer portal window. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on, kind of after the May 1st to, I think it's May 1st to 15th or something like that, the next transfer portal window. We'll see where the scholarship numbers are, and then you maybe are having a scholarship conversation involving him. Next one, at Dub 2020P. Would be great to hear your perspective that Wilson was the proponent of spread running and Fry's plan has been more smash mouth, which is going to be a big enhancement. I guess it's technically your turn, but I guess the question is, if Brian Hartline's the OC and Justin Fry's the run game guy, even if this is what Fry wants, how much say does he have in this process? And the answer is, well, I guess we'll all find out together.
I do think he's going to have more of a say in the running game, that being Justin Fry. But it's not like he was just always this smash mouth guy. And maybe at Boston College he was, but you're not a smash mouth guy at UCLA with Chip Kelly. Now, he did do some gap stuff along with all of the zone stuff that everybody else does. So I think we will continue to see his fingerprints more on the running game now that Kevin Wilson is gone, as long as it meshes with what Ryan Day wants to do. And again, as you said, how much input does Brian Hartline have in what the offense is going to do? Because I still think this is always going to be Ryan Day's offense, but he will gladly accept input. You look what like Mike Yursich brought in a lot of the under center stuff that they've done. So he will accept that. He will take it and they will run with it. And Brian Hartline will have some things that he wants to do. But I think you'll see perhaps more gap run game from Ohio State with Justin Fry having more of a say, some more power stuff like that, some pulling guards, things like that. And it won't just, not that it's all zone now, but maybe less zone. But it wasn't just all, like I said, it wasn't just all smash mouth at UCLA, because that's not necessarily what Chip Kelly does. They do a lot of the speed stuff, a lot of zone stuff with some gap stuff that they will also bring in, and they try to be creative about it. And so maybe you'll see more creativity and maybe creating some more gaps to allow for running backs to just the offense as a whole to make life a little bit more difficult on the run defenders.
Yeah, and I think the word you might think about for this year is not necessarily smash mouth as much as it is diversity. Just maybe a little more diversity in the run game, and bringing in some new concepts and that kind of stuff, where you're going to maybe be a little bit more, a little bit more variety in the run game that might make you a little less predictable, open up a few more things, and with a running back room that has 5, or if you want to count Xavier Johnson, 6 veteran running backs, some of whom have somewhat diverse skill sets, you maybe be able to tailor it a little bit more to some of the stuff that individual guys do better. One guy might do one thing better than another. And then of course you always need to be mindful of not being too predictable in what you're doing. So you can't always just do, well, when this guy comes in, we're running this. And when this guy comes in, we're running that. But you can sort of tailor things a little bit to the individual skill sets of some of the guys you got in there as well. So, yeah.
Emeka ran the ball 11 times last year for 87 yards. I think they should continue to do that. But I think a lot of the wide receiver running this year was because of the running back injuries. Mm-hmm. But I think those are effective runs. Like we're talking Emeka averaging 8 yards a carry, Xavier Johnson averaging 12 yards a carry. That doesn't need to be last ditch running attempts. Like that could be, and I wrote about Caleb Brown on Monday, and so obviously, yes, I'm still fully on the bandwagon there. So don't worry about it, people. But a guy like that, you can do different things with. I don't think you just need to. Well, let's just get back to running the ball with the running backs. And now, will Kyle McCord be, or Devin Brown be more of a runner? I think Devin Brown is more of a runner than Kyle McCord. But how much is the new starting quarterback involved in the running game as well? I think there's the versatility in terms of schemes, and then versatility in terms of how you run the ball with different guys. The versatility of the guys you're running with, I think, make all of the difficulties in defending them even greater. And I keep going back to just make it more difficult on the defense. Like these guys can do different things. They can be a pain. When they come in, you're like, what's that guy going to do? Now we got to pay attention to him. This is annoying. Just feel free to annoy a defense as often as possible, while obviously not getting away from what you're hanging your hat on.
Yeah, exactly. When it works, it's because you're being diverse. When it doesn't work, it's because you're unfocused and you don't have an identity. So just go ahead and write those down. Those are good football talking points for the fall. But yeah, to your point, I mean, if you're you're averaging 8 yards a carry from one of your wide receivers and 12 yards a carry from one of the other wide receivers, how many running backs averaged 8 to 12 yards last year? None. Okay, so you're probably going to want to continue doing that at least a little bit to provide a little bit of diversity. I always think of that in terms of Michigan and AJ Henning. It was like AJ Henning got exactly one end around, it seemed like, every single game, and it would go for 8 to 12 yards or sometimes 15 yards. And they would just run it once, but it was like, well, there's your 8 to 15 yards that you get to play that chip once every game, and you almost never saw it get stopped for a big loss. So just something that generally will work, and then will keep the defense honest kind of the rest of the time. Hey, speaking of Michigan, a very upbeat question from our buddy at Ivor Lukash. Let's start with this: when Ryan Day loses in Ann Arbor in November, positive optimism. I love it. Fantastic. Do you think he will be back to coach OSU in 2024? This to me, I think my answer on Ryan Day's future changed after the Peach Bowl, because you saw what the Ryan Day team, you saw a Ryan Day team look like what you sort of, what Ohio State fans hope an Ohio State team looks like in that game, and what I think what the expectation for an Ohio State team is. The expectation is you're not going to win every game every year, but you should be playing at the top of the sport, playing at least competitively with the teams at the absolute apex of the sport. And you saw that in the Peach Bowl. And, it's a little bit like the 2019 Fiesta Bowl, where you're playing with a team at the very, very pinnacle of the sport, and you needed like 8 to 10 things to go wrong in order to lose the game. And all 8 to 10 things went wrong, and you lost the game. It was very similar to that against Georgia. And while I'm sure Ohio State fans are a little, they're obviously annoyed at losing to Michigan back-to-back years, and probably not thrilled with blowing a 11-point lead in the fourth quarter against Georgia, the Marvin Harrison thing plays into that a little bit. And, there were legitimate reasons for some of it. And it was also the first year of Jim Knowles. And so you gotta, you sort of have to assume that that's going to get better. So I think short answer is yes. I think Ryan Day, I don't anticipate is going to get fired, even if he loses to Michigan next year. That doesn't, I think if they go 9-3 in 2023 and they lose to Michigan again, I think his seat gets a little warm. But at that point, he's not getting fired, I don't think, next year. And if you're 9-3 and you've just lost to Michigan again, is the NFL going to come, is the NFL going to come calling for you at that point, or is your stock a little bit down? If he wins, the national championship next year, I think there's a better chance he leaves for the NFL if they win a national championship or something next year. They go, 13-1 or something and lose the national championship game, or that'd be 14-1, I guess. But I think there's a better chance that something like that happens than he gets fired, or that he leaves for the NFL if he goes 9-3 and loses to Michigan again. I think the most likely scenario by a wide margin is Ryan Day is still coaching Ohio State in 2024, almost regardless of, unless they go 5-7 this fall, or, he has a great season and gets hired off to the NFL. I mean, I think by a wide margin, the most likely scenario is yes, Ryan Day is coaching at Ohio State in 2024.
Yeah, and I think if he's not, it's his choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a much more likely scenario than being fired. And I'm not saying it's a likely scenario. I just think it's much more likely than him being fired for losing to Michigan. Because as I tell everybody who asks this, it's not just the Michigan game. It's what else is going on the rest of the season. Is it the straw that breaks the camel's back, or is it just the first straw on the back? Because if it's the first straw on the back, it's you're not going to fire a guy for going 11-1 ever, unless he's done something incredibly wrong and or illegal or broken some rules. And even then, you're like, well, how bad are the rules? And really, these rules are kind of outdated if we really think about it. Computer crimes. I mean, what are we talking about? But the just losing, yes, it's a big game, but you can't firing somebody for going 11-1. It's not going to happen. It would have to, and I don't know, like, what is a fireable record, including a loss to Michigan, with the understanding that all 6-6 teams they don't necessarily look the same, because you look at like John Cooper's last team and Jim Tressel's first team, the way those teams finished the season were not the same. And granted, I think Cooper, it was 6-6 versus a 7-5 for Tressel, but like the way they finished it, one petered out, and one was like, yeah, you beat Michigan and you feel pretty good, and you almost won a bowl game, so that was pretty good. But I think you're talking like 5-7, 6-6, and it has to be a bad 5-7 or 6-6 to fire a guy that has gone to the playoffs in two of his first 4 years or whatever. And I don't see that happening. So I fully expect him back in 2024 unless he's ready to go to the NFL.
Yeah, I think there's a very, 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 very likely chance that Ryan Day is still coaching Ohio State in 2024. And the second most likely, as you said, is that he has chosen to go to the NFL. And that's a, 5% chance. And then getting fired is less than a 5% chance. Because you're right. I think it takes a 5-7 type season, and where the wheels really come off, and then you also see it in recruiting, and you also see it in players transferring out, and then you have the very clearly the program is on the wrong track kind of thing. That's the kind of thing it would probably take. I don't, 9-3 and having to play in a Citrus Bowl or something is, I don't think that's going to be the that would be a down season for Ohio State, but I don't think that is a change coach season for Ohio State. And here's one other than the sanity reason, I think the other thing that's going to play into this, and boy, this is going to transition nicely into our next question. Ryan Day's contract runs through January 31st of 2029. So Ohio State owes Ryan Day a whole crap load of money. So, unless Ryan Day is fired for cause, and I don't think there's any real reason to suspect that he would be fired for cause, losing to Michigan is not for cause, despite what many Ohio State fans may want to tell you. They would owe him what is known in the business as a metric crap load of money. And, college athletic departments right now, as you may be aware, as the donor money is starting to flow to NIL, is maybe a little less flowing to the university. And so, whether that is funding big capital campaigns for new buildings, or funding firing football coaches who you just gave big extensions to, that money's a little tougher to come by now than it was before. And you run into an opportunity cost issue there, where if you do spend, I don't know what the exact buyout is for Ryan Day, but he's making $9 million a year through 2029. So going to be a bunch. And, every dollar that you spend to fire your coach is money that is not being spent to sign players. Sorry, not sign players, because you can't use money. You can't use NIL as an inducement, Tony, to retain players, to compensate players for the name, image, and likeness rights, Tony. I'm not sure why you would have said sign players. That's not how anything works. That's the rules say so. Anyway, so, you run into a little bit of an opportunity cost issue there as well. And hey, speaking of opportunity cost issues, next one from @PaddlingBuckeye. Who is going to replace Chris Holtman? And Tony, I know people are not real happy with Chris Holtman right now, and I know, they've just won one game to kind of get the train back on the tracks a little bit. But much like Ryan Day, Chris Holtman just signed a big contract extension and is owed a bunch of money through, I think he's through 2026. I gotta pull, you can pull it up now, but you're gonna run into the same issue. And even if you owe, let's just say you owe Chris Holtman $6 million as a buyout. Even if you owe Chris Holtman just $6 million as a buyout, and then you're going to have to hire your new coach, the $6 million going to Chris Holtman has to come from somewhere. That has to come from donors, or it's coming from athletic department operating funds. And that money is money that's not being spent elsewhere. And here's I think, when people are mad about basketball, I think if you sat them down and explained that to them, like, we'll just use the number $6 million until, do you have an actual number? Or are you still working?
No, it looks like maybe $2.5 million buyout.
That's the buyout for if another team hires him, because his contract is fully guaranteed. So yeah. So his contract is fully guaranteed through whatever year it runs through. So we'll just use the $6 million number, and you can mentally change that to 5 or 8 or whatever it is. If you sat down the average Ohio State fan and said, which one do you think you can only spend this money once, because this is how money works, you can spend $6 million to change the basketball coach and maybe have a better program or maybe not have a better program, or you can spend the $6 million on NIL for football players to get or keep football players, a better quality of football player, and potentially improve your opportunity to beat Georgia, to beat Michigan. Other than the 3% of Ohio State fans who care more about basketball, I think the other 97% would look at that and go, well, I think I'd rather beat Michigan in football, or have a better chance to beat Michigan in football, and not worry as much about basketball, because basketball is kind of the off-season diversion for a lot of Ohio State fans between the end of football season and the start of spring football season. So I think that's honestly one of the things that's going to keep Chris Holtman around and give him another year, because I know that there's a lot of people whose patience is running out, but also he just got a big contract extension and it's going to be expensive to fire him. And deep down, I think Ohio State fans would probably rather that money be spent on football than basketball. So that's probably going to keep him around for at least another year. And then, there were people who were annoyed with Kevin McGuff a couple of years ago, who's been there a long time and hasn't gotten the program kind of over the hump, the women's program. And now all of a sudden the women's program is number 2 in the country and just lost to Iowa, but they're still 19-1 and number 2 in the country. And it's like, oh, well, that worked out to keep him. And you can have the situation where a guy's there for a long time and it's okay and it's okay and it's okay. And then all of a sudden it gets better and then it gets really good. So I think the answer on who's going to replace Chris Holtman is, I don't know, ask again in 2 years.
Well, and he signed his extension like 5 or 6 months ago to run through the 27-28 season. I think the answer is, who replaces where does Ohio State always go for their men's basketball head coach? They go to Butler. They did it for Thad Matta. They did it for Chris Holtman. So,
Tony, who's the head coach at Butler right now?
Funnily enough, it is Thad Matta. So what is old is new again, and that is where they will go. They will hire Thad Matta. But yeah, this is obviously not a great stretch of games for Ohio State basketball. And we got this question in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, I believe. And sure, the money is there to fire him and swallow it, but who do you replace him with? And the answer is, you replace him with somebody at that Butler level, because that's, I think the last big time hire they made in terms of like a Power 5 would have been Jim O'Brien at Boston College. And, obviously Thad Matta worked out just fine being Butler's Xavier as well, but which is where they actually got him from. But, I don't think you're going to go and get one of the top 10 coaches in the nation. You're going to get one of the up and coming top 10, 20 coaches in the nation, which is a different level than the actual top 10 or top 20 coaches in the nation. So, it's just, you're going to get another version of Chris Holtman. And so, is it the devil you know or the devil you don't know right now that you prefer? And I think for a lot of people, it's always going to be the devil you don't know.
Yeah, you're going to choose that, but there's no guarantee. And sure, John Calipari might be available at some point. Seems like that's not going great, but you look at Kentucky's kind of, everyone's sort of pointing and laughing at Kentucky. Tony, are you aware what's happening to Louisville basketball this season?
I am not.
I will go ahead and search their record, but the last time I saw, they were 2-16 and winless in ACC play. And
wow.
Boy, and that's a team. That's a program that is, that it's been a little bit of a circus for the whole athletic department's been a little bit of a circus for about a decade or more. But that's a program that won a national championship. Or almost won a national. No, they beat Michigan, right? They beat Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
They won a national championship like a decade ago, and now they are below Chicago State, which was like the absolute benchmark for a disaster program. They're below Chicago State right now in Ken Pom. That's like unthinkable.
2-17 on the season. Wow. But losing streak only 8 in a row. So at least still single digits. So that's pretty good. I think basketball is obviously, it is what it is at Ohio State. I still think it should be better, and there's no reason it shouldn't be. But you've got a good class of freshmen this year. You've got another good class coming in. I absolutely see Gene Smith allowing Chris Holtman to follow through with these two classes. And it can't just be this year or next year. It's like you need to let next year's freshman class have a sophomore season as well. So I think they're in this for the long haul. And unless, you've got 2 bad years in a row like Thad Matta had, and then boom, fired. That's all it takes, really.
Well, and I think the economic realities of the sport and of college sports right now sort of point to anything you can do to sell hope, to come up with a reason to not fire someone that has a big buyout. You're going to sort of trend, you're going to tend towards, pointing towards the recruiting, pointing towards the future, pointing towards, the hopeful season, coming up with reasons that this, this didn't work out this year, but this is because X. You're going to sell hope. You're going to try and keep that guy around, not pay that buyout because you're trying to spend money on, you got to operate your athletic department. You're trying to, funnel some of your donor money to NIL instead of the athletic department. And, every dollar you spend on buying out a coach, you can't spend on the stuff that really, no one is going to be calling for, tear down the whole athletic department if the basketball team has 2 bad seasons in a row. If the football team loses to Michigan 5 years in a row, you're going to have people calling for all sorts of crazy stuff. So I think just this is recognize the priority that Ohio State fans put on various sports and act accordingly. And I think that's sort of where it is. And there's enough hope to sell with Chris Holtman that I think he's going to be around for a while.
I wonder if I search Twitter for Fire McGuff, if something has come up since last night. I wouldn't be shocked. Although, Tom, I do want to know if an AD comes out and says, we can't afford to fire this head coach, does that head coach feel like I am now bulletproof, or I am a heel?
That's a vote of confidence, maybe. That's one of those things you're never going to hear someone come out and say. Like, that's something that gets said probably behind closed doors because you will hear about them, SEC schools. Let's say one on the plains in Alabama. You hear about this. It feels like about every 18 months, boosters are sort of rounding up money to fire the latest guy because he's had the audacity to lose to Nick Saban twice in a row. That's not a conversation that gets put on the front page of the newspaper. That's a conversation that happens behind closed doors, and it's, boosters talking to boosters and that kind of stuff. And they, you can round up the money if you want to round up the money. It just feels like there is stuff that the people with the money probably care about more than, whether the basketball team wins 23 or 19 games this year.
I'm just thinking, like anybody in any other line of work, if they are told we can't afford to fire you, that is the highest compliment you could possibly pay me. Like the fact you just said you can't exist without me. I'm like, no, we can't afford to fire you. Same thing. That is just, thank you for that.
I heard what I heard.
Tom, you got anything else?
I do not. We can't afford to keep doing this podcast. So I guess we have to fire ourselves.
Thank you for saying that. That is just tremendous, a boost to my day. So thank you for that, Tom. I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Say hello to us there on the message board. Mark Giller is having a chat today right now. We're all chiming in as well. So feel free to find that there today. Also, find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Also, youtube.com at CFB Playbook. That is, we're getting that going as well. And we'll eventually get some more stuff out there. Now, Michael Pettit is starting to put some X's and O's, what are we calling it? football school type stuff, just some learning some terminology on the BuckeyeHuddle.com, some just stuff that all of our X's and O's guys talk about, but now they're going to explain it to you so that when they talk about it next year, you'll know what they're talking about. So if you're new to the X's and O's, we're trying to bring you up to speed on all of that stuff. So find that there at BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.